Hi, everyone. Let me restate that. Hi, everyone. This is Chris. I am just doing a quick recording so that I can talk to you about your final project. So I'll just go through the document with the expectations and the rubric, and then I have one example of a paper that I'll talk to you about. So I'm not going to read the whole context. You can read that. But essentially, your task for the last course assessment is to produce a final project that demonstrates your knowledge of at least one interpersonal communication theory that you have learned throughout this semester. So we've talked a lot about, and y'all have learned a lot about different interpersonal comm theories. So we've talked about nonverbal communication. We've talked about developing relationships, ending, sustaining relationships, etc. And so there's a lot of theories that we've covered. And in order to ensure that you are able to make the connection between one of the theories and then your life experiences, this final project hopefully is a demonstration of that. So the first thing you should do is consider an interpersonal communication experience that you have had that is notable or memorable to you. For instance, maybe you are a member of a co-culture and experience particular responses from members of the dominant culture. Or you dated someone that used different nonverbal communication than you preferred or were familiar with. Perhaps you recently began dating someone and are moving through the relationship life cycles and turning points. Ultimately, choose an interpersonal communication scenario that you feel you can describe in depth and is related to one of the chapters we covered in this course. So we have an entire textbook, but we haven't gotten through all of them. So it's super important that you stay with and focus on the chapters that we have actually discovered in the class. So what follows is a detailed explanation of what you should include in your paper, your video, or whatever form your final project takes. So first, you need to explain and describe the interpersonal communication with as much detail as you can, right? Paying particular attention to answering these three questions. Who was involved in the interactions? And then what was the interpersonal experience that occurred, right? What are the elements of the interaction that are most memorable to you, and why? And then detail anything else about the interactions that you think is notable, memorable, or you want to include in your discussion. And then you're to choose the interpersonal communication theory that we've discussed in the class that you believe explains the specific communication phenomenon that you experienced. So your goal here is to explain in your own words what the theory generally seeks to explain about interpersonal communication. So it would be easy for you to, just pull the definition of the theory out of the textbook, which you can do that and you can cite it, but you also need to be able to articulate in your own words what the theory is getting at and what the theory is attempting to explain. For instance, the relationship turning point theory argues that there are crucial events that change the nature of a relationship and its future. And that would be my sort of definition of what the turning point theory is. Next, you need to indicate how the theory explains your experience. You might, for instance, argue that the relationship turning point theory explains all of the stages of your current relationship, as your partner has moved sequentially through all 4 stages proposed by the theory. And then lastly, you need to evaluate if the theory fully explains your communication experience. So you need to consider the ways that the theory might be lacking or how the theory could be expanded. For instance, if I'm using the turning point theory to explain my interpersonal comm experience, I might argue that it should include more stages to explain the development of a relationship, or I could argue that it has too many stages and that all of them are not needed to explain how a relationship forms. So that is the sort of content and organization of the paper. And then I tried to give a little bit of leeway in terms of how you actually turn this assignment in. And so you have the option, those of you who prefer writing, you can turn into paper. Those of you who are better oral speakers and feel more comfortable talking, you can turn in a video submission. And then I also have a choose your own format option, right? So if you don't want to do a paper, you don't want to do a video, maybe you want to do a little skit, record a skit, or you want to make a website or a pamphlet or something. You can come up with that idea on your own if you would like, but ultimately with that option, you need to let me know if you're going to do that, right? And then we need to come up with a agreed upon rubric, right? So if you're doing a paper, these are the general guidelines. It should be 6 to 7 pages in length. You need to have 3 to 4 outside sources to explain your document. And then these are the elements that I'm looking for. You've addressed all 3 pieces of this prompt. That'll get you 25 points. You have your 3 to 5 in-text citations and a reference page. You have considered correct use of grammar, clarity as a writer, etc. And then you demonstrate a clear understanding of your theory. So you've defined it and you've also critiqued the theory. And that'll get you your total of 50 points. And then pretty similar for the video, please make sure that you meet this timeline, the 7 to 10 minutes in length. I did have a student last semester turn in a 25-minute long video, which greatly exceeded the time limit. So please, please, please stay within this time frame. If you turn in a hugely long video, your grade is going to be very much impacted and very much lowered. A longer video does not necessarily mean that the quality is better. Your task here is to be succinct and to summarize and to be able to communicate within this time frame. And then very similar, you'll have to answer the elements of the prompt that I noted before. You have to have your 3 to 5 oral citations. And then you need to be able to demonstrate your understanding of a theory. And your video needs to have flow. It needs to be easy to understand. You're welcome to use a visual aid, something like a PowerPoint, a Prezi, a Canva presentation, etc. In fact, I highly recommend that for engagement purposes. And then, yeah, choose your own format. You can do what you want. We just need to be able to talk through that together. So this will be due July 24th, which is a Sunday. So that is a couple weeks from now, and that'll be due by 11:59 p.m. And the total point value of that project is 50 points. Now I want to turn real quick to just an example that I have of a paper, right? So this paper received a pretty decent score because it checked a lot of the boxes in terms of what I was looking for. So the author, whose name I have omitted from the document, but the author follows the first part of the prompt, the second part of the prompt, the third part of the prompt is very clearly laid out and can be followed. They also have their 3 little references and they move sequentially through the prompt, right? And so what happens here is the author talks about developing a relationship with her boyfriend and him being in the military and some sort of deployment issue happens. So this is the part where the author really details what happened in the interpersonal communication scenario, who was involved, and what elements of it really stand out. The second part of her paper is when she actually brings in her theory. So they say a theory explaining my experience is active listening, right? So I know early on that she's going to use active listening to talk about and understand the experience. She defines the theory. The theory generally seeks to explain the process that we must take for the messages that we are receiving. The process involves attending, understanding, remembering, critical evaluation, and responding. And so we learn more about what the process is. Here she brings in an outside source to help and another outside source. And then she gets into, now that she's defined and explained the theory, she details a little bit more about how this helps her understand the interpersonal communication experience. So the theory explains my experience because my situation takes all the steps for active listening to help my partner and me find a resolution. And so she talks about how attending happens in this interpersonal communication experience, remembering happens, etc. So she moves through all of the elements of the theory that are applicable to the situation she experienced. She draws the connection, and then she explains how they're related, right? How that theory explains her experience. And then we move into the third part, which is the critiquing, right? And the author notes, the active listening theory did fully explain my communication experience between my partner and me. One thing that the theory can be expanded on is improving a step on self-evaluating. And so the author argues that there needs to be an additional step included in the theory that attends to this idea of self-evaluating. And then they go on to explain what that means and how that can improve the theory. This element of the paper is a little bit brief and I thought could be expanded upon. So this author did not get a 50 out of 50, and this was the weakest part of their paper. And so more detail about what self-evaluating means, where it would be placed within the theory, how it would add to the theory, could have really improved that part of the paper. And then we have some work cited here, some reference pages, etc. So this is a pretty solid example of a paper, okay? So you're welcome to think about any personal communication theory or interpersonal communication experience. We tend to have a lot of these if you think about the work context, if you think about relationships, family communication, if you think about friendship, we're always engaging in interpersonal communication. And so you should have a wealth of experiences that you could possibly pull from. The difficult part might be choosing the theory that you want to use to explain that experience. So if you all need any help with that, if you want to get feedback on your topic choice, you're welcome to send me a message, an email, etc. And we can talk about it together and come up with an example. So that's all I have for now. And I will upload this example onto Brightspace. If you have any questions, let me know.